Hello students, today we are going to deal part 2 of the chapter An Angel in Disguise. Before I begin or continue the chapter, let's have a quick recall of our previous video. A poor woman who was discovered dead at the threshold of her own house door in the presence of her 3 children. She was in a drunken state. Her body lay cold and still among her miserable children. We also learned about the description of her house and the children's condition. We can guess that she was a big alcoholic. So, nobody in the village liked that woman, but as the neighbors heard the news of her the poor woman's death, they quickly ran to the tumble down hut as soon as they heard the news of the poor woman's death to help her, because there arose a sympathetic feeling towards the lady and her 3 children. Some of the villagers came with the discarded clothes for the decent burial of the body. Some came with food for the half-starving children. So there were 3 children in all who were orphaned after the mother's death. Now, what the villagers were seriously discussing about what to do with these children. John, the eldest boy of 12 years, was taken by the farmer John, and the second child named Ket or Ketty, anything you can say students, was between 10 and 11. She was a bright and active girl. She was adopted by Mrs. Ellis. But the youngest among them was the poor little girl Maggie, who was hopelessly diseased. I already explained to you in my previous video that what is the meaning of hopelessly diseased, because she was affected or infected with such disease that is incurable. And you also know that how she developed that disease. She had a fall from a window and injured her spine, for which she was bedridden. Since then, she had not been able to leave her bed except when lifted in the arms of her mother. So, she was crippled for life, and nobody wanted to take her home as a burden, because she was a burden for the others. Now, students, let's continue. "Take her to the poor house," said a rough man, of whom the question, "What's to be done with Maggie?" was asked. Nobody is going to be bothered with her. So, all were discussing what to do with that little poor girl Maggie. So finally, what was decided? It was decided that Maggie should be sent to the poor house. Students, please write down the meaning of poor house. Poor house is a place where very poor people were sent to live and given work to do. Especially it's like a orphanage also, you can say. Okay, so the poor house is a sad place for a sick and helpless child, answered one. Now, a little kind-hearted person showed some concern towards Maggie and said that poor house is a very sad place for Maggie. But the other person or other villager answered, "For your child or mine," said the other, "lightly speaking, but for tis brat, it will prove a blessed change. She will be kept clean, have healthy food, and be doctored, which is more than she can be of her past condition." Now, another person very rudely answered that for your child or mine, for any other child in the village, the poor house can be a sad place. But for this brat, underline brat means unruly child, or a child who behaves very badly. So the other person rudely spoke that for this unruly child it would prove a blessing, because there she would be kept clean, would be provided healthy food, and would be doctored, means medical treatment would be given to her properly. There was reason in that, but still it didn't satisfy. The day following the day of death, the day following the day means the next day of the death was made the day of burial. A few neighbors were at the miserable hovel, but none followed dead cart as it bore the unhonored remains. Unhonored means unhonored lady, the drunken lady, the dead mother of 3 children, to its pauper grave. Students, underline proper grave. Pauper grave is a place for the burial of unknown, okay, unknown people or unclaimed people. So the lady was unhonored, she was disrespected. That is why she would be buried in that place. Farmer Jones, after the coffin was taken out, placed John in his wagon and drove away, satisfied that he had done his part. Mrs. Ellis spoke to Katy with a hurried air, bid your sister goodbye, and drew the tearful children apart, as scarcely their lips had touched in a sobbing farewell. So, even the children were not given much time to bid farewell. The siblings were parted from each other, and in a hurriedly they were taken away. Hastily others went out. Hastily means quickly the others also left the hovel. Some glancing at Maggie and some resolutely refraining from a look until all had gone. She was alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off with the rest. Underline resolutely refraining from a look means some were leaving the hovel in very quickly or hurriedly, and some don't want to be moved by the Maggie's condition. So what they were doing, they were not making eye contact with the poor little girl Maggie. So she was left all alone. Just beyond the threshold, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, paused and said to the blacksmith's wife, who was hastening off. The blacksmith's wife was also quickly leaving the hovel. But it's a cruel thing to leave her so. Then take her to the poorhouse. And who is the speaker of this line? Then take her to the poorhouse. Blacksmith's wife. She will have to go there, answered the blacksmith's wife, springing away and leaving Joe behind. So quickly she also left the hovel. For a little while the man stood with a puzzled air. Then he turned back and went into the hovel again. Maggie, with painful effort, had raised herself to an upright position and was sitting on the bed, straining her eyes upon the door out of which all had just departed. A vague terror had come into her thin white face. First, students, underline vague terror. Vague terror means an uncertain sense of feeling fearful. So the little girl Maggie, was feeling doubtful as everyone left her alone with nobody to look after her. Now, everybody left the little child alone without bothering about her. So she, with much effort, she tried to sit in an upright position. Oh, Mr. Thompson, she cried out, catching her suspended breath. Suspended breath means with much fear inside her, she called out, Mr. Thompson. Though rough in exterior, now the external appearance, the physical appearance of Joe Thompson, physically or in exterior outlook of Joe Thompson was little rough, looks very rough. But the wheelwright, Joe Thompson, the wheelwright, had a heart and it was very tender in some places. He liked children and was pleased to have them come to his shop. Wheelwright means, students, a person who makes and repairs wheels and wheeled vehicles. So, in this paragraph, we can learn about Joe Thompson's nature, behavior. Actually, he loved children because whenever any children used to visit his shop, he used to repair all their articles without charging a single penny. Means he did free of cost. When Maggie uttered the words, "Don't leave me here alone," Mr. Thompson felt guilty of leaving the child as she was. See this line? "No, dear," he answered in a kind voice, going to the bed and stooping down over the child. "You shall not be left here alone." So, Joe Thompson tried to convince her, tried to make her feel comfortable that she was not going to left alone here in this hovel. So, what Joe Thompson did, when he heard the poor Maggie pleading not to leave her alone, he stooped down over her and told her that she would not be left alone. A little show of compassion and courtesy defines the humanity. So what he did, he wrapped her with the gentleness of a woman. Why it is given he wrapped her with the gentleness of a woman? Because this is the nature, this is a womanly nature to be gentle and kind. So he wrapped the little child with gentleness of a woman in a clean bed clothes brought by the neighbors, held her in his strong arms and took her home. So students, up to here, I hope you have understood it properly and you have written the words whatever I have discussed, and I shall continue the chapter in my next video.